Well, nice to have a familiar voice back here on this episode of For the Kids. Although I wonder, Lucas, you might sound a little different to the trained ear of the ECL listener because you're broadcasting from a brand new place.
That's right, Will. I've been broadcasting from my new apartment, and also I'm British now. Because
I thought you might be South African.
I might be South African. Yeah, and it's starting to sound a little bit like the movie Invictus or the movie District 9. I'm not a prawn. No, that would not be thematically relevant to the show we were watching this week. The British accent would be, however. But accents are hard, Will.
Accents are really hard. I mean, I know that I do a lot of them here, but like, if you lived with me, you could hear me practicing all kinds of accents. There are some that are just incredibly difficult to get correct, and then there are others that tend to blend into other ones. So I really have respect for people who could do them well.
That's right. And sometimes it's the people's native accents, like the characters in the show we're about to talk about this week.
Precisely. You know, there's a lot of differences. I mean, we've got a plethora of accents here. We've got American, obviously. We've got British. We've got French, and in this episode, we even have Italian American.
the some might say the greatest of all accents.
Right. You know what? A nation unto itself.
Yes.
Yes, this is For the Kids, a PBS Kids podcast. My name is Will Young, and joined by Lucas Mancini. This week, Lucas, this was your pick, and this was one that we would be talking about since we started the show as one of the ones that it would be most interesting to go back and revisit for us specifically, and that's Liberty's Kids.
That's right, Liberty's Kids. I guess we'll start off with my personal experience with the show.
Please.
I've always kind of like enjoyed history as like a subject, especially when I was like in elementary school and stuff. So even though we're not American, and it's kind of funny that Liberty's Kids was even on here in the first place. But as you know, Canadians in our school system, we learn very little about American history, as opposed to, I think, you know, Americans, this stuff's really ingrained. The founding fathers and all that is a huge part of their elementary school curriculum. So for me, most of the stuff I know about American history is from like this and like Hamilton or something, right? Like it's very much from pop culture. But I really liked Liberty's Kids way back in the day, so I was interested to return to it to see how it holds up.
Yeah, I mean, we were asked this question, I believe, in the Discord about what is our experience even with American history, and my answer to that was that I think there was maybe a bit of it represented in our traditional education, but I feel like a lot of American history we kind of had to fill in the gaps with through like TV and movies and books and like the type of stuff that we encountered. So even if we're talking about more modern history, like say JFK or Watergate or
that stuff we would learn if you took like a world history class in like high school.
Yeah,
but in elementary school, it's all you know. It's all you know, Lucy Maud Montgomery and you know,
Lester B. Pearson.
Lester B. Pearson, exactly. The Confederation.
Responsible government.
It's all the heritage minutes, exactly, all that kind of stuff. Which I will say, not to dispel Liberty's Kids off the bat, but in terms of educational television programming meant to teach you about your country's history, Liberty's Kids does not hold a candle to the epic sort of offering that is the Heritage Minutes.
You know, that would actually be really cool. I mean, I recommend the history.ca Canadian Heritage Minutes to anybody listening to this, regardless of if you're Canadian or not. That actually might be.
Oh yeah.
I just got this idea. That could be like a fun stream if we did that one time.
Well, you can watch all of them in one sitting, right? Because each one's a minute long, and there's only like 70 something of them, so it's like an hour and a half to watch every single one of them.
Precisely. Like maybe we should get those gears turning. Maybe, but yeah, you can. My wife and I have definitely gotten drunk and watched the whole thing. more than one time. They're a hoot and holler.
Do you have a favorite?
Oh, yes, I do. I'm just struggling to think of what it is at the moment. I'm really bad at thinking of things on the spot. It's probably, oh God.
Is it Vince Coleman, Will?
It's not. I don't believe that's the one. I would have to, like, might be the basketball one.
Oh, the basketball one's really good.
The basketball one is really good.
Oh.
I know that there is like a stone cold, like, it's absolutely this. It's just I'm really bad at.
You like the Blue Nose one a lot.
The Blue Nose one is good.
Blue Nose one's good.
There's one that the Jackie Robinson one's really good.
All the sports ones. The Rocket. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
That one's fantastic. When he's like moving into his house. For all the American listeners who have no idea what we're talking about, I highly recommend watching the Heritage Minutes. I tried to think of some hipstery answer to be my favorite one. John McAuley was wrong. That was the Mississippi. But
that was just kind of funny.
That one is really funny. But I have to say, my heart of hearts, it's got to be the Vince Coleman one, just because it's about Halifax.
Right. And there's a lot of really interesting ones that, for context, I mean, this is probably the closest that we would have gotten to something like Liberty's Kids, because I can't think of, off the top of my head, any cartoons that were like the Canadian equivalent of this sort of thing. There wasn't like the establishment of the country done in cartoon form.
Something like Yvonne of the Yukon, some might say, is ahistorical. and very, and some else might also say deeply offensive.
God, I can't believe we let something like Yvonne of the Yukon exist. It's so.
It's. Ugh. I went back and watched a clip of Yvonne of the Yukon recently just to see, like, is it as bad as I think it is? It is deeply, deeply offensive, Will.
To French people,
to Indigenous people, Chinese people.
Oh, Christ.
There's some bad stuff in there. It's no good.
I don't know if I want to know. Okay, so just to put a pin in this, because I've got the list open, I would probably say right this second, and I'll, if I think of it later, I'll correct myself. It's probably the Valor Road one. Like, I think that's genuinely the best one, because it's like on par with like a movie.
Yeah, there's like the ones that are kind of funny because they're like they get a good hearty chuckle out of me. Like, the one where the guy's talking about why Canada's called the Canada is always a classic.
The one with the flags?
There are no. That one's really funny too. But the one where they're arguing, he's like, "That's the name of the villages," and he's like, "No, it's Canada. That's the nation. That's its name."
Right.
The one with the flags is Prime Minister Doofenbaker. We were just talking about you. But yeah, the Valor Road one is a couple of them. I would say the Vince Coleman one also rises to those heights where it's like they're not just comedic. You kind of get they get a rise out of you. You're like, "Aw, Canadian history."
I think my personal favorite is, like, this one's kind of underrated. I really like the Nat Taylor one about the guy who invented the multiplex theater.
So I actually, and I must have told this story like a million times on the podcast, but I've seen a live performance of all the Heritage Minutes.
I did too.
At the Bus Stop Theater. Did you go to that as well? What?
Oh my God, we went to the same one.
Okay, we definitely did not talk about this before. That's crazy that I didn't run into you. But their portrayal of the Nat Taylor one was really well done. Maybe we went to a different showing. I would have felt like I'd run into you. The Bus Stop Theater's not that big.
Yeah, I feel like that's true. How did they do it?
The guy just had the glasses, and he's like, "Oh yeah, it's a multiple." Like, he was really hamming it up.
Right. Oh my God, that was so fun. I went to it with my sister. We both have a big place in our heart for the Heritage Minutes. Anyway, all this to say, the Canadian Heritage Minutes are probably what I would consider to be the closest that our generation got to something like Liberty's Kids, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And it all has to do with American history. Of course, if you weren't aware, you probably would be since you're a patron at this point. Lucas and I live in Eastern Canada, so a lot of our knowledge of American history is kind of bespoke. Lucas, like you said, you have a bit more of interest in history than I think that I do. You and I have talked about. I remember you and I had a discussion in the early days of this podcast when we were both working at the same radio station about which U.S. presidents are considered to be the best ones.
Right. You know, you got your FDRs and your Woodrow Wilsons, and then there's the real bad guys like oh geez, like Andrew Jackson, boo. But yeah, I forgot about that conversation, Will. Oh my goodness. But yeah, I kind of like history, and so, you know, as someone who would sit down and watch friggin' Ken Burns' The Civil War or whatever for funsies, that spark was still in me even when I was a little kid. So I was already kind of drawn to Liberty's Kids.
Yeah, and of course, as we go along here talking about the show itself and the episode, any of our American patrons, if we end up misrepresenting the facts, or if there's anything you want to add, please feel free. We had a couple of good episode suggestions in the Discord, and if you have any other lingering thoughts on the show, you can leave them below in the comments or in the Discord. So yeah, Liberty's Kids. The last couple of episodes we've done for the kids, I've been like, oh yeah, the research is really interesting and all this kind of stuff. This is one that's a bit more standard in terms of how it was conceived, and like there's not a whole lot surprising about Liberty's Kids. And I kind of say that for both the development of the show and the show itself. But, you know, it's got a fairly interesting history that I decided to take a look into. So it's one of those things where I kind of thought that when I started doing research about it, I was like, this seems like it was somebody's like big idea. Like my theory was that this is probably one person and all they wanted to do was like make a cartoon about American history. And that's not exactly true. It was the show is based off an idea by a producer named Kevin O'Donnell, and it was developed by him, Robbie London, Mike Maliani, and Andy Hayward, and all of them were producers at Deke Cartoons. And, you know, you remember at the end of a lot of cartoons from when we were younger, there's the thing at the end with the kid in bed, and then it goes out to the moon, and Deke.
Yes, very funny. When you're 7, that's hilarious. That is so funny.
And Deke, of course, animation studio that's been active since the 1970s. I did a bit of looking into Deke. So I feel like I'm going to say Deke a lot now. It's going to make me laugh.
You know, if you were a private investigator, one might say you were a Deke Dick this week.
A private Deke, yes. So it's funny because looking it up, chances are you've seen a Deke cartoon in your childhood or in your life. What I didn't know was that it had a reputation from the 1970s onward that it stood for do it cheap, because a lot of the cartoons that it made were of like they produced a lot of them, but sometimes the quality wasn't great. One of its most popular cartoons that it helmed was the Inspector Gadget cartoon. And they did tons of cartoons for Disney as an ABC subsidiary for a long time. So if you've seen a cartoon on Disney afternoons or one Saturday morning or stuff like that, it's probably Deke. This I also found interesting. So I think I think it was the Teletubbies episode that we did. We did a For the Kids episode recently where we talked about how the rights for the show in question, I think it was Teletubbies, is possessed by a company right out of Halifax, where we're from, called WildBrain. And it turns out WildBrain also owns the Deke Library. So not only is Teletubbies here in Halifax, Liberty's Kids is here in Halifax.
That's so wild. The Halifax owns Liberty's Kids.
Yeah, I'm starting to think that maybe I should reach out to WildBrain and think of some things to talk to them about. The show was written by a fellow named Doug McIntyre, who was a writer for such television shows as Married with Children, WKRP in Cincinnati, and Full House. And his work on
WKRP rules.
I actually haven't seen it, which is like weird because we both worked in. It's just like I don't know where to find it.
Oh my goodness! No, WKRP still holds up. That's a very funny television show.
Well, and everybody who's worked in radio, especially people older than us, are just like, yeah, that's my favorite show. And I'm like, I've never seen it. I've seen the As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly thing, because everybody I know in radio shares it on Thanksgiving, but that's about it. Doug McIntyre was nominated for a Humanitas Prize for his work on Liberty's Kids. A Humanitas Prize is for film and television writing, quote, intended to promote human dignity, meaning, and freedom. So I think that this, resonated with at least people who produce television, if nobody else. So this is the way that Liberty's Kids was aired. It aired on PBS originally. This would have been September 2002 to April 2003 was its initial run. So I would have been 12 years old when this aired. And
I gotta say, ain't this the most 2002 looking show you ever saw in your life?
All the edges.
Like, yeah, the art style, the edges, the way they draw the eyes, the way it's kind of like pseudo anime inspired. Like, I feel like this was at the peak of cartoons being kind of like, we want to look like Eastern animation, but not really. So this is like the westernized version of anime. They all kind of have this look. And this was kind of the advent of the big switch to digital, right? We talked a little bit about this in the Redwall episode about how results may vary when going back to these early 2000 shows, because some of them they kind of stand up the test of time, and some of this early digital animation stuff, it looks really dated. Liberty's Kids, pretty much, I don't think it looks dated, but it definitely looks like a show from the early 2000s.
Yeah, and it's what's interesting about. Or I meant to ask. Late 2002 to early 2003. How old would you have been?
I would have been in grade 3, pitting me at about 9, I think.
So probably right at the time that this would have been, made the biggest impact on you. It aired on PBS originally during that time. Then the show was syndicated to affiliates of smaller networks, so the CW, My Network TV, and it was syndicated to those smaller networks in order to fulfill the educational and informational requirements for networks by the FCC. So American television stations have to have a certain amount of educational content during a 24-hour span, so they picked up shows like Liberty's Kids, and that counted as educational because every episode of the show is about something happening in American history during the Revolutionary War. So during that time, as a matter of fact, this, I couldn't believe, Liberty's Kids still airs in reruns as recently as last year in syndication. So
whoa.
If you have a robust American cable package, chances are you may be able to find Liberty's Kids somewhere out there in cable.
They should have just kept going on with the concept. Like, already it's kind of ridiculous that these 3 little kids are seeing every important moment in the entire American Revolution. They could have just kept them grow it up and being like, okay, and now the kids get to see World War I and the American Civil War, and what happens if their great-great-grandchildren go to Vietnam. Like, you could have just kept up with all for good or for better or for worse, all the ins and outs of American history through the eyes of these plucky young kids.
The special guest for today's episode is Colonel Kilgore, and the kids get to learn what victory smells like in the morning. A lot of really notable guest stars, which we will talk about this episode's guest star a lot, I know.
Yes.
But there were even more than that. Like, going down the guest cast list is wild, and they're all playing historical figures. So let me just name a few off for you.
All the stars are here.
There's Ben Stiller, Billy Crystal, Dustin Hoffman, Whoopi Goldberg, Liam Neeson, Michael Douglas, Ray Fiennes, Arnold Schwarzenegger was on an episode.
Will, what historical figure does Arnold Schwarzenegger play?
So
is he Austrian? What Austrian is in the American Revolution?
So they had to bend it a little bit in order to get him in there, I guess. So Arnold Schwarzenegger is Baron Friedrich von Steuben, who is listed as a Prussian officer in the Continental Army.
Oh, okay.
So again, much like Arnold Schwarzenegger's movies, there's just this European gentleman who exists in American culture, and we don't question it.
I wish they had just been like, you know what, Arnold Schwarzenegger is John Adams or something. Like, you know what I mean? Just like picked something out of the blue that didn't make any sense.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. You know, he's John Hancock.
Yeah, exactly. The same way that, like, Jean-Claude Van Damme is, like, in the movies where they're like, oh, yeah, this is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed American, and he talks like Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Colonel Guile, Jean-Claude Van Damme. I'm going to get in my boat, and I'm going to kick that son of a bitch Bison's ass.
It was the anniversary of that movie recently.
That's right. You're right. 20th or something?
Yeah. Good movie.
Wow.
Underrated film.
It's pretty silly. It's good if you're in a certain state of mind. Also, this guest star I think is interesting. So they did have Alexander Hamilton on the show, played by Andrew Rannells, who is a Broadway star, voice actor as well, and he was part of the original The Book of Mormon cast.
Oh, wow.
So he's like the lead role in the
world.
Book of Mormon. So that guy played Alexander Hamilton. No Lin-Manuel Miranda to be seen. It was not his time yet. And we also had Walter Cronkite, legendary newsman Walter Cronkite, playing Benjamin Franklin, who was one of the main roles in the show. And he got 2 Emmy nominations for Outstanding Performer in an Animated Program because of it. So he was kind of one of the big draws of the show, and we kind of hear him at the end. When the show was aired on PBS, so instead of commercials, they would leave space for the commercials like we saw. It's kind of where those photo book transitions are. The PBS would air the Liberty News Network recap segments and just kind of do other games. And that's where the syndicated networks would just, put in commercials. So that's pretty much the history of the show. It kind of came in, did its thing, and that's all they had to say. It didn't seem to be anybody's like passion project or anything like that, but they did put a fair amount of backing into it, it seems. And before we get into the episode, let's talk a little bit about the theme song of Liberty's Kids, which for me is what has stood the test of time for better or worse.
So the themes, usually when we talk about theme songs, whether it's on this show or if it's on Elwood City Limits, I just get an initial gut reaction, right? I'm immediately, this slaps, this hits, this goes, or, it's trash, PU, get that out of here. The Liberty's Kids theme song is really just a roller coaster. Because initially, during the kind of the pre-chorus, that like R&B part, the bridge, if you will, I'm like, wow, this is terrible. This is like really just poorly made music. This is like session. Listen, session musicians get a bad rap. Session musicians have made some of the greatest theme songs known to man. DuckTales. That's a theme song made by session musicians. That's one of the greatest songs ever made. Okay? So I'm not going to blame it on but man, the pre-chorus in the Liberty's Kids theme song is borderline unlistenable. And I was just ready to write it off. I was like, wow, the Liberty's Kids theme song, yuck, PU. Boom, chorus hits. Fantastic chorus. Phenomenal.
Looking at life through my own eyes. It's so catchy. It's so memorable.
We're truly all just looking at life through our own eyes. Well, so the chorus itself, immaculate. Perfect. It's got that soaring. You're like, yeah, I'm a part of history. Let's go. Gets you ready for the show.
Yeah.
What a theme song should do. And then the rapping part starts. And I almost like fell out of my chair. The rapping part's so bad.
I'll take my heart into battle. Give that freedom bell a rattle. Red, white, and blue, never give up. You represent America.
They really should have called the Spider Riders guy. Like, this is some bad. As far as kids cartoon rapping goes, and I know it's a broad spectrum. From like the prime example, what's the best, highest level kids cartoon rapping can be? Why, of course, it's the 4Kids version of the One Piece theme. Okay,
Yo,
Chopper's Doctrine. Okay, like that's an incredible song.
That's Monkey D. Luffy.
Yeah, that's right. Yo ho ho, he took a bite of gum gum. But this, I think, is at the other end of the spectrum where just no good.
Well, and it's also not helped by the fact that this is the twilight year or years of Aaron Carter, who is doing the rapping segments.
No. Aaron Carter, in his second appearance on For the Kids, this is becoming a running theme.
Maybe we're gonna have to interview him too. Although maybe I don't know if I want to. Yeah, it's Aaron Carter doing the hip hop parts, and a singer named Kayla Hinkle who's doing the singing. The only note that I really have about it is that it struck me as very early 2000s, which isn't a great descriptor, I know, but there's a type of production that it's very it's very slick. There's no, and I mean, pop music generally is pretty slick, but there's a glossy sheen to the production that you get in this kind of time period. And there's also like a very clumsy incorporation of like hip hop elements and kind of like putting a beat to it. And it's just like, it doesn't work all the way, but I agree with you. Like the chorus is easily the strongest part. It also has the strongest lyrics. There was one I wrote down here because like I remembered it was like na 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 na, but I couldn't remember the words. And it was, living, like looking at life through my own eyes, feeling the pain as innocence dies. And it's like right at the point in the opening when it's like people getting shot, people being scared. And I'm like, oh, okay. Wow.
Well, that was something that I was wondering, and they don't really, American history is that, much like all world history, is one of bloodshed, right? And so that's something that's interesting about Liberty's Kids is the difference between Liberty's Kids and something like the Canadian Heritage Minutes is that the Canadian Heritage Minutes are they're not, serialized. It's just like a little snapshot or a vignette of a minute of history. And it's also all with adults, right? So they can tackle these adult subjects to varying degrees of success. Liberty's Kids, it's a children's show. So how do you talk about things like war and slavery and also have to put in this made-up plot, it's historical fiction, about these like three little rapscallions viewing every major event in American history. And so it's kind of curious to see how they probably have to soften some of the corners.
Big time, but it also feels like they're making it age appropriate while representing the historical part as best as they can.
There's a lot of parts of the dialogue where it does literally just sound like someone reading a textbook.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let's get into the episode. I feel like we're going to be covering this a little bit differently because it's a lot more straightforward than some of the other shows we've tackled. Like there's a plot. It goes from A to B to C. There's very few surprises or like it really is focused on the history. I think for the better, but it's also not like I guess there's not a whole lot of like quirkiness to it as there can be with some other ones.
I will say there was one huge surprise, and that was this week's celebrity guest.
Exactly.
That was a pretty big surprise to me.
So I specifically picked the episode "The Midnight Ride," which is about Paul Revere, the legend of Paul Revere, and that part of American history. So the idea behind Liberty's Kids is that the titular Liberty's Kids are these three kids who work for Benjamin Franklin in like his printing press to get news out to different parts of the American colonies. And so there is Sarah, who is the redhead, and she is British.
Steadfastly British. This was a weird introduction to Sarah. I was almost confused. And maybe this is given my remedial understanding of American history. But Sarah, I was like, oh, okay, I remember her. She's on like the cover of everything. She's the protagonist. And then she's talking with a British accent. I was like, wait a minute.
Well, and I like when we started this, I was like, oh, I kind of thought that the characters would be less established. You know what I mean? Like I thought we would be able to hop in basically anywhere, and we kind of were. But then I was like, oh, okay, I don't know who these people are. So there's Sarah, there's James, who is the blonde-haired kid, and then there's a younger French boy named Henri. And Henri, of these three, of the like the main voice actors who are here for like every episode, other than Walter Cronkite, Henri is the only one who has like a recognizable voice actor, played by Kathleen Barr, who did voices for Reboot, Dragon Tales, Ed, Edd n Eddy. Her voice is very recognizable.
Now, are you sure about that? Because I believe James. Let me just look this up on IMDb real quick.
Well, so Sarah's voice actor, I didn't I think this was the only thing she'd ever been in, according to IMDb. James was in like 2 other things, and neither of them I recognized.
Really? I could have sworn James had a voice where it's like he sounds like, let's just say, Liberty's Kids. I trust you did your due diligence, but now I'm curious what these 2 other things were. Because, like, I don't know if it was like, if he was the voice of like the like YTV pre-rolls or something, but there was something like maybe it was just this is that why he sounded so familiar.
Okay, so the other thing is, did you ever watch Archie's Weird Mysteries?
I did watch Archie's Weird Mysteries, but I feel like that's not what I'm remembering him from.
So he was the voice of Jughead in Archie's Weird Mysteries.
Oh,
and it's like it's that, and it's a TV movie called Time Kid.
Oh, whoa. Time Kid, you say?
Yeah.
I want to know more about Time Kid.
An adaptation of H.G. Wells' Time Machine for Nickelodeon.
Interesting. That might be 2003. That might be something to... Oh, and it kind of looks like the same art style as Liberty's Kids. Weird. I think I've seen it. Okay, we're getting way off the plot.
Not anybody that I recognized playing James here. So... The episode starts off with Sarah writing a letter to, I believe it was her parents, and talking about her time in the colonies. She had a funny way to pronounce it. Like, it's funny you did your South African thing at the beginning of the episode, because it kind of sounded like she was pronouncing it in that accent. She's British, but she was also just like, I'm having a lovely time in the colonies.
Yeah, I assume that anyone putting on an accent in this show, including, of course... their little friend, none of them are native speakers of that accent. Everybody's kind of putting it on.
Yeah. So there's like a kind of a break-in at the newspaper office where they're staying, and they try and kind of just trip up the 2 people who are in there. And it turns out that one of them is an ally of theirs whose name is Moses, and he is I looked it up, he is one of the regular characters of the show. Like at this point I was like, maybe we should have started with the first episode. But after this point it's just like, okay, once you figure it out, and if you have Wikipedia handy, then you're pretty much fine. And so he represents a group called the Mechanics, who are basically how would you describe the Mechanics?
They're like, a secret society. It's like, this shows how Canadian our perspective on all this stuff was. I was like, oh, these guys are like those guys from Fallout 4. Which is literally just kind of like a science fiction take on this real life concept.
Well, it's funny, like, I looked it up. I Googled the Mechanics and, like, 1776, Revolutionary War. I couldn't find anything about them.
So the Mechanics might not be real, but the other one, he mentions the other one, right? Was it the Sons of Liberty?
Sons of Liberty.
So that's the
real one. Which, of course,
one.
made me think of Metal Gear Solid 2.
See, this is how, like, again, how kind of stunted our knowledge of American history is. But yeah, the Sons of Liberty are a real organization founded by Samuel Adams and the 13 American colonies to advance the rights of the European colonists and to fight taxation by the British government.
So Sarah and James are taking upon themselves to go to Boston to deliver a message from the mechanics. Was it for? Or was it from them? Involving the Mechanics, and then cover the story that ended up being the story of Paul Revere. The British are coming, and I apologize if any of my explanations are a bit spotty here, because there's a lot of American history that I'm not 100% familiar with, so I kind of had to take like leaps and like, okay, I guess I understand what's going on.
I will say, so a technique this show used, and you mentioned it earlier, is the when it's going to go to commercial break or to go to the segments that were on the original PBS version, they do this cool like kind of comic panel thing where you see these screen caps from throughout the episode on display. And you kind of, it's like a tease. You can kind of look around and be like, ooh, when's this going to happen? And there's also like a little sting. As someone who watches 80s anime, I love a good sting. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's also something that was ingrained in my memory from my youth.
Yeah, they go, Liberty's Kids goes to commercial with, dun-dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun-dun, show!
Exactly.
That's the only one I know. So there was another editing thing that they did to kind of shake it up a little bit around the 9 minutes 20 seconds mark when they're going into Boston, I think it was. I'm sorry. There's like a ghostly fade out as the background fades into the cityscape, and then like they're focusing on James, and then he just kind of like disappears. So there's a couple of like editorial things that they did to make it a little bit interesting. Boston, Massachusetts Bay Colony. That's what it was. So Sarah and James, and of course this is, hundreds of years ago, they take a 2-week boat ride and along with a 4-hour walk to get where they're going, which we kind of had to gloss over, but they mention it later when they show up at the place where they're supposed to deliver the message, and it's just like, sir, we've spent 2 weeks at sea and walked here for hours. And I'm like, wow, that did not feel like they were out there for 2 weeks. I'm glad they said something.
By the way, throwaway character of the week, I know that's more of an ECL thing, but the boat guy wearing his little fisherman's toque, definitely some East Coast style representation there. That guy is a surefire throwaway character of the week, especially after watching The Lighthouse last week. I was like, ooh, I love this guy.
A maritimer for sure. They almost get caught by British soldiers, but managed to evade them on their way to the colony. And this is when we get to the colony, and the person they're meeting is at first suspicious, but eventually they're let in, and they meet Paul Revere and William Dawes. Paul Revere, played by Sylvester Stallone.
That's how the winning is done. I can change. You can change. Everybody can change.
I must admit, I was a little disappointed. I was kind of hoping he would sly it up a little bit more, but he kept it fairly reserved. You can definitely tell it's him, though.
That's true. I did immediately be like, I believe that is Sly Stallone. I think that is Officer Cobretti himself.
Well, it's a little bit of a shame of just like, oh, I guess I expected him to be Rocky all the time, which I know that's like the go-to Sylvester Stallone thing, but it's like, no, he kind of sounds like a normal person, just like, General Paul Revere at your service, and just like, yeah, okay. Like in the back of my head, I'm just like, was like, yo, Adrian. Yes. Like he doesn't talk like that. That's just one character he did. He's a little bit of a better actor than that. So yeah, they team up with William Dawes and Sylvester Stallone to get the word out to the colonies that the regulars are coming, which was a bit of a history lesson for me. I always, I know it from the British are coming. There's even a Paul Revere shout out in season 1 of Arthur, and it's like, yeah, the British are coming, and that's kind of what Paul Revere's lasting legacy is. But it's the regulars are coming, which is most likely what they would have said at the time. I know it's been done before. So the whole thing is that you've got these kids tagging along for important parts of American history, and the whole thing is that they're of the time. They're reporting on these things, which I think is fine. But I wonder what would have happened with the show if the main kids were time travelers instead.
Ooh.
Do you think that would have improved the show, or do you think it would have made any difference?
I don't know. I think that one of the show's biggest weaknesses is because it is educational, and I mentioned this earlier, like, you get some good voice acting and character work, like, of course, from Paul Revere or from Ben Franklin, but the kids themselves have, like, this weird, like, stilted dialogue. Because they're trying to make them have, like, a rapport, but they're also trying to keep them historically accurate, but what ends up happening is that a lot of the times everyone's dialogue literally just sounds like people reading out from pages of a textbook. Like, well, this is going to happen, and this has happened. And it's like, well, these people think this because of this, this, and this. And none of it all kind of falls a little bit flat. So I think your solution would be amicable, where it's like, if it's some kid from 2003 San Francisco who found a magic book and he went back in time to 1776, whoa, that would add a little bit more color, I think.
I think so, but then at the cost of, like, I also agree. I thought the voice acting in the show was actually kind of weak, all across the board. But I think that when you make it about the kids being time travelers, then you kind of switch the focus away from the historical element, and I think it being the way that it does makes it more historically accurate and puts the educational part out at the front. If you were doing it with time travelers, then you're trying to make it a bit more entertaining, which is
true.
which is fine, but it doesn't seem to have been their focus. And so I understand kind of why that route wasn't taken. Plus, when you're doing the time traveling route, it's like, okay, you can kind of write that show in your head, because it's like it's like there's got to be the boy, there's got to be the kid, there's got to be the girl. They'll probably have like a dog, and then there's like a talking book or some.
Yeah, some like robot that talks to them. I will say though that the one other issue with it being like, okay, these are actually kids of the time, is that it makes the whole thing a little bit ridiculous, because it's like these like 3 11-year-olds are seeing every important moment in American history, and it's like, if this was real, these people would have lived the most incredible life anyone's ever lived.
Right, it's a bit Forrest Gump in that way.
Exactly.
Just like he just so happened to be at these points in history. I mean, it's a cartoon, so there, and it's an educational cartoon, so like I can look past it. But you're right, like you and I, I'm sure, have snickered at entertainment made for adults that has indulged in that before. Of just like, oh yeah, they just so happened to be at this part in like World War II or something. Okay,
I think the perfect solution was actually developed in another PBS show that maybe we'll talk about someday, Wishbone, in that you make the character of the time, but you also just make them a dog.
Right. So there's a little bit of a compromise between the two.
Exactly.
I also wondered so we talked about the roster of guest stars. Sylvester Stallone is in this episode, obviously. I wondered how they were able to get them, because, it's a publicly funded television cartoon. And I wondered if maybe the attraction for these guest stars was they were eager to help make an educational show about American history. Like, I'm really curious about that part of the show's development, how they managed to get all of these. Like, they got Walter Cronkite for the whole show, and he didn't do a whole lot of voice work.
Yeah, I wonder if it counts as like charity work or something. As in, it's
Maybe.
like a service for the public good, this putting together educational programming. Because you said like Liam Neeson, right? Billy Crystal.
Yeah.
2003, Billy Crystal still had quite a bit of clout. He was host of the Oscars and stuff.
Liam Neeson was in a Star Wars movie a couple of years before this.
Yeah.
So, and he was in Love Actually. So, like, these aren't just anybody. Whoopi Goldberg at that point has like a sitcom. Like, she's not on The View yet. So as I was kind of watching the show, as it's them as they are going through the towns, I really had to respect the fact, and we kind of touched on this a second ago, the show doesn't seem to be just paying lip service to these important moments in American history like a lot of other shows that we've seen that are, historical in context, and just like they just kind of like, oh yeah, this is totally happening. They're really doing the work to show the places that everyone went and represent how everything would have been done at the time. Like, they keep flashing back to the map of like, here's what Paul Revere's route was upon his midnight run. This is where he would have gone. There's like Chicago, Boston, like all this kind of stuff. It took them 2 weeks to get from wherever to wherever by boat. So there is really an attempt to be historically accurate, and their intention to educate seems to be fairly pure.
Yeah, and that stuff, all that map work, of course, is very reminiscent of another PBS offering, all those Ken Burns documentaries, right? That's like 95% of those documentaries is someone breathily talking about, General Lee and his forces across this river and what have you. So
right.
It makes sense.
There's a point where Paul Revere and James are in like a boat and they're rowing, and the person rowing them ties petticoats to the oars to like silence them. Like, I didn't know you could silence oars.
Yeah, that's the strat. That's like, when
it's like shooting through a pillow.
Exactly. It's like in 21 Savage, instead of when he does a gun ad lib, it's always a silencer, because 21 Savage does home invasion, so he goes. So we got to have like 21 Savage do a bar about like, my oars be muted. Just like Paul Revere.
My oars be muted. And so, yeah, it's the midnight ride. It's the regulars are coming, the British are coming, all this kind of stuff. There's a point near the end of the episode, because James and Sarah are both talking about the fact that like, oh, can't wait to report on this. Everybody needs to know the truth about this.
By the way, during the scene, they look like they're wearing Snuggies.
Yeah, it's you're talking about the very, very end when they're like by the fire warming up, because they've been through some shit by the end of it. They've been, it's a cold night. they've been through the mud and all this kind of stuff. They were briefly captured by British forces. There's a really cool point here that, James is like, oh, I can't wait to tell everybody about the midnight ride of Paul Revere. And Sarah's like, well, William Dawes was there too, and he did the exact same thing. So I think the truth needs to be told. And I looked it up and I'm just like, yeah, wow. The cursory knowledge of American history that we have is just like, oh yeah, Paul Revere, midnight ride. Never heard of this William Dawes fellow. So I learned something from watching this show.
There you go. I learned two things, actually. It's that, one, about William Dawes, and two, Paul Revere was a clout shark. He took all the clout for himself.
Jeez.
It doesn't matter what happens, Will. Clout is forever, it seems.
I think that's much better than what I was going to say. So they write down their manuscripts, and that's going to be part of the newspaper. And the end of the episode is the soothing voice of Walter Cronkite as Benjamin Franklin to give us a few wise words of wisdom about young people living through passionate times, and soon there will be a reckoning. I just know it. And he's got such a wonderful voice. He was also in, did you ever see We're Back, A Dinosaur Story?
Oh, that movie is a fever dream. I saw it when I was a very little kid, and I found it odd and unsettling.
That's one of Cronkite's only other voice acting credits. And it's an immediately recognizable voice, and I love the way it sounds. And I'm a little jealous that my parents got to grow up with him as a regular news anchor for decades. And that's the end of Liberty's Kids. So, Lucas, from when you were in third grade to in your new apartment and living on your own as a man, how did Liberty's Kids strike you all these years later?
I would say that I think Liberty's Kids is very effective at what it's trying to do in terms of talking about these things in American history which might be boring to read out of a textbook, but to recontextualize and present it in a way that would be entertaining for a 9-year-old via this animated story with these kids. Coming back to it as an adult, I'm like, if I want to learn about this stuff, I'd probably rather just read the Wikipedia article than have to listen to this weird, stilted dialogue of people being like, yes, we have to get to Philadelphia by this time on this day, and it will take this long, because it's a little bit boring when you present it that way to an adult. That being said, I think the show is effective, and I kind of wish there was more shows like this for more different time periods. I think that history is something that can be really interesting to kids when presented in this way, and I think, there's kind of endless amounts of history to tackle in this method. So the more historical kids shows they can make, I think all the better, and I think Liberty's Kids is notable for being kind of one of the only one of those.
I guess I didn't mention when you talked about it at first that I don't have much history with the show myself. I remember it being on PBS at the time. I was still watching Arthur when I was 12, but I never really watched much of the show. American history never really interested me all that much, so I never really paid it much attention. I do respect what it tried to do, and I think it did it very well. It's just the other side of the coin is that it's not terribly entertaining. I didn't have a whole lot to say about the show, but it's also kind of not trying to be, so it feels weird to kind of grade it on that scale. I remember thinking to myself, so where would I want this show to be? PBS is perfect for it because it has all kinds of that educational stuff. But then you try and put it on syndicated networks, and I'm like, I don't think this holds up with a lot of other cartoons that are either more flashy, more entertaining, or are able to put educational or substantive content in a more entertaining spin. This is almost something that I would show in schools.
Yeah, it's got big substitute teachers going to play the VHS vibe for sure.
Right.
It's not quite the level. It's certainly not the level of an Arthur.
No. But it really it also was not around for a long time. It wasn't a staple. It was a little over half a year, and then it kind of just got out. It did what it had to do, and it's still going on. So it's not like it's overstate its presence or, annoying to any degree. It's just it knew what it was. It did it relatively well and got out, and I kind of respect it for that. So, yeah, it was just kind of interesting to more think about this in terms of what it was trying to do versus watching it as a show. Watching it as a show, I wouldn't watch the rest of the series, but I guess I more appreciated it and respected it more than I liked it, if that makes sense. Well, that's another episode of For the Kids, Liberty's Kids, that is. And we thank you very much for joining us for this one. Now, I'm excited because it's my turn. It's my turn to pick now.
We're playing in Will's. We're in Will's world right now. It's Will's world. We're just living in it.
That's right. So I want to thank everybody for your suggestions for Liberty's Kids. And of course, when it comes to our next episode of For the Kids, we want your episode recommendations. This one is going to be really tough to pick. Not because we don't know anything about this show. If anything, I feel like there's too much to choose from. Because, Lucas, next time on For the Kids, which is coming up in 2 weeks, seatbelts, everyone. It's time to go on the Magic School Bus.
Oh my gosh.
And I made sure to look up. I was like, oh my God, the Magic School Bus aired on PBS.
Wow, I'm speechless. We're gonna talk afterwards. I have very strong feelings about which episode we should watch.
Okay, well, that's absolutely going to be part of it. But if you have strong feelings about what episode we should watch, leave a comment below on Patreon or talk to us in the Discord. I know that there's going to be a lot of people with a lot of opinions about the Magic School Bus, and we want to hear them all. Yeah, this is going to be great. I'm really excited for the next episode of For the Kids. How about you, Lucas?
I'm pumped. I'm ready. I'm getting ready to make mistakes and get messy, if that's what you're asking.
You're damn right. All right, my name's Will Young, and that was PBS.